It may seem counterintuitive given the intense focus on artificial intelligence and the significant investments that businesses across industries are making in it. But we are still in early days applying the capabilities of more advanced forms of AI like generative and agentic. Welcome to a new era of American innovation, a podcast series from Google and custom content from WSJ. I'm Brian Kamenetsky, Senior Editor at Custom Content from WSJ. Joining to discuss are Michael Spence, former Dean of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and Fabien Curto Millet, Chief Economist at Google. Thank you both so much for being here.
It's a pleasure, Brian.
Google and MIT Work of the Future hosted a summit inviting over 70 C-suite leaders and academics to its headquarters in California to discuss the tremendous investment that businesses, particularly enterprises, have made in AI. Across all industries. Where are we in this sort of maturity and adoption curve for AI? Fabien, we'll start with you.
Good question, Brian. Well, it's still early innings. If I look at sort of my favorite data in terms of adoption for the US, that comes from the Census Bureau, and they ask a question which is to firms, do you use AI in the production of goods and services? And that bit is critical because there are many surveys out there that ask, has your firm adopted AI? And then you get, very high numbers, but it could be just putting the puck on the ice. So for the production of goods and services. And so what they get is that 9.7% of firms in Q3 reported using AI in that way. So still early days, a lot of heterogeneity across the economy. So if you look at, information sector or professional, scientific, technical sectors, they're at 25%, so much more. Manufacturing is at 5%. So sector by sector, it varies. You also have sort of large versus small firm divergence. So larger corporates above 250 employees, they are at 12%. So it's jagged at the moment. You hear that term a lot.
So the subject of this episode is the future of work. And so I will ask the large, very broad question, how is AI changing the way we think about work?
Now, if you listen to the people who wax lyrical about AGI, they predict or, depict a world where sort of, work essentially is an option, where you may do it as a hobby, but we'll have AIs and robots everywhere. And it's not my baseline case as an economist. I don't want to rule it out, but, I'll be like St. Thomas and believe it when I see it. The baseline case is more that, AI will behave like other technologies we've seen, that it replaces or automates individual tasks, not jobs. It's very rare that it replaces an entire occupation. If you're a trivia night, the one it did replace was elevator operator. That was automated away. But otherwise, you have a more subtle impact. But subtle does not mean insignificant because in the long run, if you look at where we come from the late 19th century, we were working 60-hour weeks in this country in dangerous occupations like coal mining. We're now working 43-hour weeks. And that's what we want. Everybody wants more jobs and less work. This is what technology sort of offers as you sort of roll the movie forward. Technology is really relieving us of a lot of, burden, life expectancy is up, etc. AI is going to sort of, I'm very optimistic about what it can deliver.
So, Michael, when people ask you this question, how does AI change the future of work? How do you respond?
The job is not just to forecast, but to steer. So we want to maximize the potential for augmentation or machine-human collaboration using their distinctive advantages. And we want to have the right kind of automation. We're going to get a mix. I think we have to take seriously that a ton of jobs, the majority of jobs, are going to change. People have different capacities to navigate those changes, and the ones that have more difficulty with it are going to be sideswiped, probably need a little bit of support. And so on. So we ought to be ready for that.
So what lessons are we learning about the need to empower and upskill people as AI tools become more deeply embedded in workflows and maybe even transform or take over others?
So, empowering is, the right word. And sort of in the green shoots we're seeing in terms of applications, some people are eagerly adopting and feeling very empowered, and that we need to encourage more and more because the workforce that we're going to have in 2030, over 80% of those people are already at work in G7 economies. So we need to meet those people where they're at now with contextually relevant, training, upskilling opportunities. it's a public-private problem essentially to solve. Google, for its part, has, for example, launched various career certificates which allow people to learn about AI and also to demonstrate that they acquired the relevant skills. We have an AI Essentials course, various other courses. So we need to lean in that direction, I think, collectively as a society. But a lot of blue-collar jobs will also be transformed by AI. Predictive maintenance or even in agriculture, weather forecasting, we're pushing the boundaries of what we can do there, again, thanks to AI. And even when AI does not become part of a job, it's already having implications for blue-collar work. So there's a big shortage of electricians in this country. So McKinsey says 130,000 are needed by 2030. So that demand also comes because of all the data centers that we are investing in to build the AI revolution.
How do different stakeholders, whether you're talking about developers, educators, businesses, governments, how do they work together to build resilient and adaptable workforces?
A great, question, and one that's kind of ongoing. We think about this very much, within Google. One thing that I'm citing a lot is that the future is not a forecasting exercise; it's a design problem. And so we're very conscious in our role as developers and deployers of a technology that this is having or going to have a big impact out there, and that there is this kind of boundary between automation and augmentation. And automation can lead to sort of lazy adaptations of AI, where you do what Darren Acemoglu calls so-so automation, where essentially you have self-checkout counters that impress nobody much, but people still roll out the technology, whereas you have very creative, imaginative uses of AI that empower workers. And you hope that the marketplace will sort out those things by allowing the latter uses to flourish competitively, because there is a lot of value to be unlocked.
Michael, do you see any change in the nature of ROI in an AI era? Should companies think of it differently or measure it differently?
First of all, I think the cost cutters will lose to the people who are more creative and think about enhancing customer experience, growing revenue, and so on, and even a completely different way of serving people. It's sort of like I used to sell you a car. Now I'm selling you transportation services. It's just a different mindset. The reason intangible assets are interesting, important, is partly because they've taken over, as the main source of value creation. 25 years ago, 80% of the valuation of any major index was tangible assets. Now it's 20. The figures are reversed. And intangible assets tend, not completely, but tend to be assets that are expensive to create, but the marginal cost of delivering the benefits is very low. And that has all kinds of considerations. Guy who gets there first may win. The bigger one, has the higher returns. They'll be developed in big markets, not small markets. All kinds of considerations that I think, will be part of the economic discussion, part of the business discussion, part of the policy discussion.
Similarly, returns, the bottom line is the bottom line. If you're in the public sector, the number of citizens served, in healthcare, the sort of amount of care provided, those are still the maximums that you have. But it's just that AI allows you to, deliver on those dimensions, orders of magnitude above what you were able, to do before. But hopefully the North Star of your organization, if it was set correctly, does not need to change.
Michael said something interesting, too, about the use of AI. Those that use it to expand, to think more innovatively, will be the people who see, the companies that see the most value from it, versus those that use it to sort of cut, to shrink things. How do you look at that equation?
Michael is right. A key statistic from David Otter and colleagues, 60% of employment in the US today is in roles that did not exist 80 years ago. So that's what the technology-driven creation of new positions, of new employment does. And that's the dynamic that we are just starting to unleash with AI. And so the economy is going to shift, and the people who are sort of more innovative, deliver the kinds of solutions that Mike has mentioned, are the ones that are going to take share. And so that's the sort of creative aspect. If you just use AI narrow-mindedly, like to, Henry Ford, develop a faster horse, you're only going to go so far.
When you look at the landscape and you think about the landscape of work in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years, what does it look like?
Oh dear. So the forecasting question reminds me of a Chinese proverb, he who lives by the crystal ball ends up eating broken glass. So to be done prudently. Well, first thing I would say, my predecessor Hal Varian always said that, in Silicon Valley, we tend to overestimate what can be accomplished in a year, but underestimate what can be accomplished in 10. So you've given me a range of time horizons here. I guess at the 2-year mark, I think we will still be in this kind of artificial jagged intelligence mode of operation. By the time you hit closer to the 10 years, I mean, things are moving very fast. If you look at previous general purpose technologies, and this is a little bit hand wavy, but the steam engine took 60 years from invention to the productivity statistics being visible there. Electricity, 30 years. Personal computing, 15. And what we're seeing of the adoption curves of AI is faster than any of those technologies. And you're going to see leaner corporations able to emerge and compete successfully on the market. So closer to your 10-year mark, that should be around.
What does that look like for just like the guy at the office? Like, shows up, he's using productivity software, trying to create better products or better workflows for the company. Like, will that person's job drastically change? It will be a slow evolution. It's like that's the part for me that I think many people are interested in.
I'll try. So take people like us in academia. If you go back far enough, if we were all interested in the world, we had to collect data. We spent well over 50% of the time collecting data and well under 50%, trying to figure out what it's telling us. I think, if you apply that, and now it's, completely different, data sets, 20%, clean them up, and then get on with it. And that's, we don't measure productivity in our world very well, but I mean, that produces a whole lot more interesting research. I think you take an analyst, right? He's going to spend less time scrounging around, reading the literature and whatnot, because the AI will summarize it for him, and more time developing the kind of judgment and insight that really matters, that humans do still better. I've asked myself the question, there is a space that's occupied by humans. We don't define it very well, but I think that's where we create value, and that's where we're going to spend more of our time.
And essentially what AI does, it's an advance in the statistics of prediction. It makes us much better at doing those predictive calculations, but then the judgment is still the human. And what AI will deliver for workers across the economy is less drudgery. So for Mike and I, it's less data cleaning. But for people in the healthcare sector, it's doing the paperwork more efficiently and actually focusing on care. And those people are, I hear it all the time, burned out, have immense workloads, and they're not doing what they got into the sector for, which is helping other humans. I think AI actually opens the door to us having a lot more of that.
There is that concern people have. AI will eliminate this job or take away that job. It's in that space that you're talking about of that human ingenuity and human capability that the new opportunities and the new jobs and all these other things will form.
Precisely.
And they'll help them do it. I mean, when you get an overworked orderly or nurse, they're prone to make mistakes. Well, this sidekick will help you prevent that. I think the short version is more rewarding jobs.
Well, we will have to leave it here. Michael Spence, Fabien, Curto, Millet, thank you both for the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.